So we have an equation here that we want to solve. This equation is not just any equation because of the x squared in this equation, x squared being the highest power of x. This is called a quadratic equation. Now, this quadratic equation can be solved in a multitude of ways. If you're a highly skilled at factoring, you would be able to factor the left side of this quadratic equation. You would be able to factor the expression on the left side as 2x minus 3 times x plus 4. Actually, it's backwards. It's 2x plus 3 times x minus 4. 2x plus 3 times x minus 4, and that would equal 0. And you could solve using the zero product property, knowing that one of these two factors would have to equal 0. 2x plus 3 would have to equal 0, or x minus 4 would have to equal 0. And so you come up with your solutions that way. I'm not going to finish that right now because that's not the topic that I plan on discussing in this video. I plan on discussing what is called so here we have a quadratic equation. I plan on discussing the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is a formula that will solve any quadratic equation. That's what, in my mind, gives it an advantage over factoring. Factoring will only solve certain quadratic equations, but the quadratic formula will solve any quadratic equation. And the quadratic formula is this: x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I sang it for a reason because it makes it much, much easier to memorize the quadratic formula if you sing it to yourself as you're learning it. And trust me, the quadratic formula is absolutely positively something that you want to memorize. There's no other formula in math that's used more often, hardly, than the quadratic formula. Because solving quadratic equations comes up oh so often in higher level math. So the quadratic formula is absolutely something that you want to know. You want to learn it by heart as soon as possible, not just to take a test that you might be working on in quadratics, because they're going to come back to you. All right, so now you might be thinking, what are these A's and B's and C's? Well, in this quadratic equation up here, 2 is my A, and -5 is my B, and -12 is my C. Because, see, this quadratic equation is in standard form. It is in the standard form a x squared plus b x plus c equals 0. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 is the standard form of a quadratic equation. And the quadratic formula allows you to take A, B, and C, plug them in, and figure out what x equals. It's that simple. So let's do it. And what I recommend when students use the quadratic formula, especially until they get used to it, is to do this. Just put empty parentheses blanks where the variables are. And then fill them in. So B was going to go in this slot, negative, I made him green, didn't I? B is going to go in this slot, in this slot. A is going to go in this slot, 2, 2, and C goes in this slot, negative 12. All right, so this will equal, when I simplify down some, the opposite of negative 5 is 5. 5 plus or minus the square root of, the square of negative 5 is 25. And then I've got minus 2 times, 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 12, with little arithmetic skill, I believe that's 96. So minus, I got negative 96, so that ends up actually being plus 96, all divided by 4. So we've got 5 plus or minus the square root of 121. Oops. 5 plus or minus the square root of 121 divided by 4. So we've got 5. Well, the square root of 121 is 11. So we've got 5 plus or minus 11 divided by 4. Well, we have to treat those as two different numbers. 5 plus, darn it, 5 plus 11 divided by 4 equals 6 divided by 4, which is 3 halves. 5 minus 11 divided by 4 is, my goodness gracious. I'm going to go back and fix that other one. Negative 6 divided by 4, which is negative 3 halves. What an embarrassing mistake for a public video. 5 plus 11 is 16. Wow. Divided by 4, and that equals 4. So these are your two solutions, 4 and negative 3 halves. And if we look back at the factoring, you can see that if x minus 4 is the factor that equals 0, then x would equal 4. And if 2x plus 3 equals 0, x would equal negative 3 halves. So now this quadratic equation could have been solved using quadratic formula or factoring, but let's do one that would only be solvable using the quadratic formula. Okay, x squared minus x minus 1. Okay, we know that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a in this quadratic equation is the coefficient of x squared, which is 1. B is the coefficient of x, which is negative 1. And c is the constant, which is negative 1. So let's do I permit the c again. Oops, I got rid of my A. Okay, so A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is 1. All right, let's see what we come up with. The opposite of negative 1 is 1, plus or minus the square root of, oh wait, C is negative 1 there. Yep, I messed that up, port AC. Okay, so plus or minus the square root of 1 squared, negative 1 squared is 1, and this is going to be minus 4 times 1 times negative 1 turns into plus 4 divided by 2. So this is 1 plus or minus the square root of 5 divided by 2. You can write the solutions that way, or you can write 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2, 1 minus the square root of 5 divided by 2. That's what this means. It means those two different numbers. But you wouldn't have been able to solve this by factoring because of this irrational square root of 5. So you wouldn't have been able to factor this quadratic expression. So quadratic formula would really be the only way to go unless you learned another method called completing the square. But personally, I think the quadratic formula is a lot simpler to use. You just have to memorize the formula, and then you're good to go.